How are you guys doing? Today is Thursday, May 6th, 2021, out here in this quarantine. I'm James Sims, and for this episode of The Elite, I'm going to do an individual profile on Cameron Heyward, the elite starting defensive tackle for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Today he turns 32, and with this elite profile, I plan on using his accomplishments, his accolades, his achievements throughout his career to kind of create the argument to help understand why he is a defensive tackle that stands out from others in a sense that he is an elite player at what he does. He's a very elite at what he does. And if you're not familiar with Cameron Heyward, he stands at about 6'5", 295 pounds. For a defensive tackle, I mean, that's very big. But of course, he's very crafty, he's very quick, and he's very consistent. This is a player that's consistently made Pro Bowls, and he's one of the reasons that you can really kind of count on the Steelers defense to be a very consistent force in the AFC, no matter what's going on with their offensive side, that their defensive side is going to hold it down because of what Cameron Heyward has been able to do for the past half decade on this team. So just to give a little bit of background, he's originally from Georgia. He would get offers to go play at Ohio State. And at Ohio State for all 3 years, he would play. He would play every game. His freshman year at Ohio State, he would play all 13 games in a season where the Ohio State Buckeyes would finish with an 11-2 record, and they ended up losing in the BCS National Championship to LSU. But in that season, Cameron Heyward would finish with about 33 total tackles in those 13 games, with 10 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks, and this is as a freshman defensive tackle for Ohio State, which is a very good program, which doesn't let a lot of freshmen start every game. His second season at Ohio State, he would play 13 games as well, and this season Ohio State would go on to lose the Fiesta Bowl with a 10-3 record. They lost to Texas, but in this season, Cameron Heyward would finish with 36 tackles, 3 more than the previous season. He finished with 3 sacks, half a sack more than he did the previous year. And he would also finish with a forced fumble just like he did his previous year, as he was continuing to show that he was one of the better young players. In 2007, he was actually named a consensus All-American. 2008, he wasn't. But in 2009, he would play all 13 games for an Ohio State team that would go on to win the Rose Bowl versus the Oregon Ducks after they won the Big Ten for the 3rd year in a row. This year, Cameron Heyward would see his his total tackles increase to about 46 total. He had 6.5 sacks on the season, and like I said, he was continuing to rise into one of the best defensive players all around. And then his senior year at Ohio State, he would play all 13 games. He would play all 52 possible games that he played in his 4-year career. And in the season, Ohio State would end up beating Arkansas They beat Arkansas in the Sugar Bowl when they went 12-1 in a season where I think they had all of their wins vacated. But still, he would finish with 48 tackles on the season, 3.5 sacks. He had an interception return for 80 yards. And after his last season, he was named to the first team All-Big Ten. He established himself as a good enough prospect to be taken with the 31st overall pick in the 2011 draft. That is the second to last pick of the first round of the NFL draft. He was taken by the Pittsburgh Steelers, and ever since he has been their defensive tackle that they have been able to rely on up until this day virtually. His first season would come in 2011, his age 22 season. He would go on to play all 16 games. He would not start, but he would play in all 16 games of a season where the Steelers would finish with a 12-4 record, as they would finish with the second best record in their division under Mike Tomlin. In the 16 games he played, he finished with 11 total tackles, as he probably finished with 1 sack and a forced fumble. That year, the Steelers would end up losing to the Broncos in overtime. That was the year that Tim Tebow threw it to Demaryius Thomas, and Demaryius Thomas went wild. But following the season, where Cameron Heyward wouldn't see himself play a lot, he would see himself play, but he would see his snaps increase gradually more his second year. In 2012, his age 23 season, he would play all 16 games in a season where the Steelers would finish with an 8-8 record. They won 4 less games than the previous season. in this, or you would see Cameron Heyward. He finished with 20 tackles and 1.5 sacks in those 16 games that he would play. But following the season, he would start games. After the first couple games in 2014, he would see himself, or 2013, he would see himself becoming a regular in the starting lineup. In this season, in 2013, he would start 13 of the 16 games that he would play in a season where the Steelers finished with an 8-8 record for the second year in a row. In this season, Cameron Heyward would see his combined tackles rise from about 20 to 59, so he tripled his tackle numbers. He finished with 5 sacks on the season. He also finished with 7 passes deflected. He would not receive, and he wouldn't be named to a Pro Bowl, but of course you would see his influence start to spread around. But this is the first season where he started to actually impact the defensive line. His 4th season in Pittsburgh was his age 25 season in 2014, where he started all 16 games for the very first time in his career. This year, the Steelers they would finish 11-5, the first time they made the playoffs since they lost to the Broncos after missing the previous 2 seasons under Mike Tomlin. In this season, Cameron Heyward would finish with 53 tackles on the season, 7.5 tackles as a defensive tackle, which up until then was the most, or as a defensive end. He was playing defensive end at the time. That's the most that he'd ever put up in a season. And once they had made the playoffs, the Pittsburgh Steelers would go on to lose to the Ravens in the very first round of they lost in the very first round of the playoffs, losing in the wild card 30-17. But following that, of course, Cameron Heyward would start to be counted on more and more. His 5th season in Pittsburgh was in 2015, his age 26 season. He would start all 16 games for a Pittsburgh Steelers team that would finish with a 10-6 record, the second best record in the AFC North. In this season, he would stay at about 54 tackles per game. He finished with 7 sacks. He would defend 2 passes. And once the Steelers made the playoffs, they would go on to beat the Bengals in the wild card round, but they would end up losing to the Broncos in the divisional round. And this is in 2015, where the Broncos ended up beating the Panthers in the Super Bowl, just for a little bit of context. So they lost to the team that would eventually win the Super Bowl. In 2016, Cameron Heyward would come back, and he would start all 7 of the games that he played in. As in 2016, he would end up tearing a pectoral muscle when they lost to the Cowboys. But in those 7 games that he played, he finished with 21 tackles, 3 sacks. And following that year, the Steelers would go on to beat the Dolphins in the wild card playoffs. They beat the Chiefs in the divisional round, and then they would lose to the Patriots in the AFC Championship. But they put together a pretty good season, and once Cameron Heyward came back, he would become a very consistent linchpin in that defense. In 2017, the year where he finally made the switch, he started all 15 of the games that he would play in a season where the Pittsburgh Steelers would finish with a 13-3 record. That would be the best record in the NFC North and the best record that the Steelers have put up since Cameron Heyward has been on the team. He would finish with 45 tackles on the season and 12 sacks, which, of course, would put him pretty high up. He finished with 2 forced fumbles on the season's 3 passes defended. And in 2017, in addition to being named a Pro Bowler for the very first time in his career, he was named to the NFL First Team All-Pro for the very first time in his career at the defensive end position, which, of course, would change a lot for him and would give him a lot more responsibility but I imagine he was incredibly prepared for that. In 2017, the Steelers would end up losing to the Jaguars in the divisional round, and after that, they would not make the playoffs for the next 2 seasons. But that would be the first season in which Cam Heyward became a Pro Bowler, and he would continue to show that consistency over the next couple of years. In his 8th season with Pittsburgh and his age 29 season in 2018, he would start all 16 of the games that he would play in a season where the Steelers finished with a 9-6-1 record. In this season, he would finish with 51 tackles on the season, just 6 more than he did the previous year. He played most of his games at defensive tackle as he finished with 8 sacks on the season. He would be named a Pro Bowler for the second time in his career, and even though they didn't make the playoffs, of course, being named a Pro Bowler on the defensive line for the second year in a row is no fluke. In his 3rd year, following that, his 9th season in Pittsburgh was his third straight season in which he was named a Pro Bowler. He would start all 16 of the games that he would play in a season where the Steelers went 8-8. And of course, this was in the midst of all their Antonio Brown, Le'Veon Bell drama. He would still finish with 83 tackles on the season, which is the most tackles he'd ever put up in a season. He finished with 9 sacks, which is the second most amount of sacks he'd ever put up. He would be named to the Pro Bowl for the 3rd time in his career, and he would be named to the All-NFL first team for the 2nd time in his career, for the 2nd time in 3 years, and being named the best player, one of the best 2 players at your position for 2 out of 3 years is not a fluke. It's proven that he is. No, I mean, he's definitely a player that separates himself from other players that play his position consistently. And this would transition, I would say, best into this most recent season with the Pittsburgh Steelers. He would go on to start all 15 of the games he would play in a season where the Steelers would finish with a 12-4 record, the best record in the AFC North, and tied for the 2nd best record that the Steelers would put up since Cameron Heyward's been on the team since his rookie season. He would finish with 54 tackles on the season and 4 sacks. He would be named an All-Star or a Pro Bowler for the 4th season in a row, and he would be named to the All-NFL 2nd team for the very first time in his career, being named the best or the second, or he was being named a top 4 defensive lineman for the 3rd time in his first 4 years in the NFL, or for his last 4 years in the NFL, which I believe earned his respect, which I believe earned his recognition into being named and recognized as one of the elite football players in the NFL. As of right now, they are off season, but he is turning 32 as he is transitioning into his age 32 season. Coming off 4 straight Pro Bowl seasons, it's very possible that he could enter what could be another Pro Bowl season, and I could be talking about him just like this next season. But with that said, I want to thank everyone once again for listening to all 12, 13 minutes of this piece. I hope all is well. And if you ever get a chance to watch Cameron Heyward, he's wearing number 97 for the Pittsburgh Steelers, unless he changes his numbers sometime soon. But with that said, he is definitely an elite player to keep your eye on for the 2021 year. With that said, I want to thank everyone once again for listening to this piece. I hope all is well. And once all of today's exhibitions are done, I will come at you tomorrow with today's exhibitions. With that said, I want to thank everyone once again. I hope all is well. Thanks for listening to my piece, and peace out. I will catch you tomorrow.